Hi everyone, this is Victoria Bowler from We Are the Music Makers, and we are here to talk about Assessment in the Music Room Part 2. So if you walk into any elementary music room, you are likely to see students singing, moving, reading, writing, dancing, playing instruments, making up their own music. All of this is a natural part of a typical elementary music classroom. And each of these activities can give us some crucial insight into what our students know and how we can help them move along in their musical progress. That insight is called assessment. And sure, assessment might look like students sitting with a pencil and a sheet of paper answering teachers' questions, but it also might look like students working in small groups. It might look like students playing a game in centers. It might look like students using iPads. It might look like students singing or playing instruments or any number of activities that they do in a regular music class. And that's because assessment can and should be just like a typical day in music. So I've tried to take down some form of assessment in every single lesson. Now, not all of these grades might be recorded in a grade book, but they make me really happy to look at. And here's why. Without those daily assessments, I might not know that the kid running around the room doesn't need to try to sit down and focus. He's bored. I know from his assessments that he can complete every single musical task I ask him to do far above my expectations. Daily assessments point out the child who more or less matches pitch in March, but who couldn't find her singing voice in January. But with all the students I see in a week, I might forget this one student's progress, or even worse, I might not even notice it at all. Last video I said that when our assessments are thoughtfully constructed and consistently implemented, they can give us a direct picture of our effectiveness as educators. And we don't assess students because our state says that we must. We don't assess our students for our principles. We do it because we need to know what our students need from us. So today I'm giving you a peek into my classroom and what works for me. These are really simple assessment ideas. They're very specific, they're very practical, and you're probably doing a lot of them already. Let's jump right into 5 assessment strategies you can use in your music classroom. Now, I know that every teaching scenario is different. Some schools have access to a lot of technology. Some schools might just have one iPad that is for an entire grade level. Whatever your situation is, there's probably a way to use technology in your music classroom. This year I started using Seesaw in my music classroom. If you're not familiar with Seesaw, it is mostly a communication tool that teachers can use to show what they're doing in their classroom, and parents can get on board, they can find their child, and every time you upload something as a teacher, that parent can see. You might want to upload a really fun activity you're doing, like a game. One easy example of this would be for you to record directions to a center and kind of model the end result of that center activity, so that when the kids are rotating in different parts of the room, you can be somewhere else while your students are still getting instruction from you. And what's great about this is that it can work even if your class only has access to one iPad. Another way to use technology in assessment is through audio recordings. So audio recordings could be used in centers. If you have students practicing something like sight reading or playing an instrument, you'll just use the device of your choice and have students say their name and their class, and then they just record whatever it is that they're doing in that center. At the end of that lesson, you have all of this audio data that you can go through and listen to. Another option for audio recordings is not just for centers, but for whole class activities. This is especially useful if you don't want to like carry around a clipboard or your seating chart and mark down students individually. Just record like that 3-5 minute activity and then go back and watch that clip and just jot down your grades then. Now, this is a tried and true method by so many music teachers, and there's a reason that everyone uses singing games for assessment. One of the great things about singing games is that students can just be literally playing a game while you are assessing their musical progress, and that's a really special thing. So here are just a couple singing games that I like to use. I'll share a singing game and then what grade level you can use it with and what you can assess with this singing game. Kindergarten has a song called Good King Leopold. King Leopold says, "You must ask again. This time use your singing voice, your speaking voice, your whisper voice, or your yelling voice." So obviously a really great thing to assess with this game is 4 voices. In first grade, there's a really great song called Cuckoo in the Clock, and that one uses so and me. It uses quarter note, eighth notes, and it also has a solo singing section. So all of those things would be great to assess with this song. In second grade, I like to use a song called Round and Round, or sometimes people call it Boom Makalele. This song uses law, it uses quarter notes and eighth notes, and it uses the singing voice. So all of those are great things to assess with Round and Round. In third grade, I like to use a song called Dinah Dinah, and Dinah Dinah uses mi, re, do, and it also uses 16th notes. For upper level singing games, I like to use a song called Big Fat Biscuit in 4th grade, and that is a jumping game. Big Fat Biscuit uses low law, and it also uses a dotted quarter and an eighth note. And then in 5th grade, I have so many that are great singing games to use, but one that I really like is Liza Jane. That one's really fun for assessing high do. Now, all of these songs that I mentioned, I said singing with them every single time, but it doesn't have to be singing. You could really easily take sections of that song and put it on instruments. It's just as easy to assess instruments as it is to assess singing. So don't think that just because there's singing games, you can only assess singing. That's not true at all. And what I mean by this is the class will show you something and you can just glance around the room and really quickly jot down your assessment data. So let's run through a couple different ways to use whole class visuals with a couple different examples in each one. The first one is just simple thumbs up, thumbs down. So let's imagine you're in a 4th grade class and you're working on a melodic element, let's say low law, and the teacher's gonna play a melody that's written on the board. And then you say, boys and girls, did I play that correctly? And the students just give you thumbs up, yes, you played it correctly. Thumbs down, no, you made a mistake. Easy peasy. Another great whole class visual is sign language. So in kindergarten, for example, you might be practicing rhythm and beat. And if you're practicing rhythm and beat, you might have a student come to the front of the room and play a song on rhythm sticks, and that student might be playing the rhythm. And then you'll ask the class, did this student play the rhythm or the beat? And the students can hold up an R for rhythm, or they can hold up a B for beat. Quick teacher aside for this, I like to count to 3 and then have students show me their answers on the count of 3. And there are a couple of reasons for this. The first one, really simply, it just gives kids a little bit more time to think through their answer instead of shouting out like the first thing that they think of. And the second reason is it kind of discourages kids from just holding up an answer and then looking around the room and seeing what everybody else did and then changing their answer. Another tip I have for using whole class visuals, sometimes I only jot down the students who give me the wrong answer. Like if the whole class gets it except for like 3 kids who have given me the wrong answer, instead of writing down correct, 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 incorrect, correct, correct, I'll just jot down that so-and-so had the wrong answer. It sounds really negative, but it's just to save time. Now, I don't use written assessments in my classroom that often, and I think that sometimes in music they get kind of a bad rep because we have this idea of active music making, and we think that for students to be actively making music, we're not allowed to have paper and pencil in our classroom. They're only allowed to dance all the time. And obviously that's not what active music making is. You do have to be careful with pencil and paper assessments because like I said in my last video, that data that you get is probably pretty limited. So I use paper and pencil assessments sparingly, but it would be a shame to not use them at all. One really great way to use paper and pencil assessments is through the form of exit tickets. Exit tickets are simple, targeted questions that kind of wrap up your day's lesson. Here are some examples of exit tickets you might use in your classroom. Name an instrument in the strings family. What is the name of this symbol? How many beats does a half note get? Listen to your teacher sing this phrase. Does it have our mystery note in it? And there are lots of fancy exit ticket packets available on Teachers Pay Teachers, and those are awesome. But it's also okay to have kids just write their answers on a scrap sheet of paper or a sticky note or something like that. Another written form of assessment that you could use would be worksheets. And there are so many fun ways to use worksheets as assessments. Again, I use these sparingly, but it would be really sad to not use any written activities at all. So here are just a few ideas to get you started on written assessments in the form of worksheets. Students could write down really short compositions that they've created using your target element that you're practicing. Students can dictate a melodic phrase that you sing for them, and for that they might use staff notation, they might use solfege, they might use stick notation. If they're young, they could even just write the melodic contour of the phrase. It's whatever you need for that assessment. Centers are another tried and true method of assessing students, and with good reason. For one thing, they don't put students on the spot, and this is really, really important in creating a classroom environment that feels safe and supported for all of our students. There might be some students in your classroom who wouldn't volunteer for a whole class activity, but in Centers, it's a smaller group and it's much lower pressure. So that is one way to make sure that all of our students have a way to show what they know. Another reason you might really like Centers is that it's easy to differentiate. Some teachers prefer to mix up the ability levels of their Centers groups so that high achieving students are with low achieving students, and the higher students can kind of help the lower students. I actually prefer the opposite of this approach. I like to group students really carefully according to their ability levels. And I say really carefully because I don't want it to be obvious to the class, because that might lead students to think that some kids are good at music and some kids are bad at music, and the truth is we're all just growing as musicians. But that's a subject for another video. My point is, grouping students by ability level can do wonders in addressing specific learning needs. The third reason people really like Centers is that you as the teacher are free to go around the room and drop in at whatever group might need your help. You could also have a center with just you and that group of kids, and that's just a great way because your higher achieving students can continue to progress while you bring your lower students up to speed, or at least make progress towards bringing your lower students up to speed. Really quickly, I'll say that Centers don't need to take up your whole entire class time, although they certainly can if you want them to. Another option though, especially if you have a large class time, is for you to do a welcome activity at the beginning and then Centers, and then a really quick practice activity with the whole class on a specific element you're working on, and then a closing activity. And if you repeat that structure for maybe 2 classes, you can ensure that every student has a chance at each center. To recap, assessments are informative, but they are limited. They take time to execute, but they save in planning time later. The data we get from assessments takes time to record, but the information we get is so worth it. Again, when our assessments are thoughtfully constructed and consistently implemented, they can give us so much information about ourselves as educators. I hope you have an amazing teaching week, and thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in the principle that I use to record data in my classroom, I'll link it down below. You can have it totally for free. Happy teaching!